Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about the philosophy of Critias, whom I'm reading out of a Pre-Socratic's reader. So in earlier videos about the Sophists, I had said that I generally like the Sophists. I'm generally a fan, in part because I feel that they invented my job as a teacher of rhetoric. Critias is the exception. And I don't feel terribly bad about that, in part because Critias was not a sophist as such. So unlike Protagoras, Gorgias, and Antiphon, he was not a teacher of rhetoric. He was a politician, but he's associated with the sophist school and the sophist style. Critias was a leading figure among the 30 Tyrants, which was a group of oligarchs installed to rule Athens in 405 to 404 BCE after the Athenians lost the Peloponnesian War to the Spartans. The 30 Tyrants were a very autocratic rulership, which was exactly the kind of thing that Sparta wanted, particularly for their defeated Athenian enemies. It was not exactly the kind of thing that Athenians, who, by 405 BCE, pretty much every person living in Athens would have lived their entire life under a democratic system. And most of them, obviously there were aristocrats and people like this who opposed the democracy, but the bulk of Athenians would have been very pro-democracy, even by the end of the Peloponnesian War. So Critias was not popular. The 30 Tyrants were not popular. They were massively oppressive. They killed a large number of people. They executed people. They exiled people. They confiscated property, etc., etc. And Critias was a leader of this. And as a person who thinks democracy is basically a good system, though representative democracy could do with some improvements, I don't really approve of Critias. Hashtag woke. Fuck this guy, though. And Critias's philosophy, the bits and pieces we have of his philosophy, really sort of suggest this very cynical, authoritarian worldview. So one thing that he says that suggests his cynicism is that more people are good by practice than by nature. And so the idea here is that morality is not innate. Morality is not something that we as human beings do. Morality is conventional. We do good because we are concerned about the social or legal implications of not doing good, right? If we are motivated to obey the laws out of fear rather than out of goodness, then this undercuts ideas about morality and the value of morality, right? And this is sort of the critique that atheists sometimes make of Abrahamic religions in particular, but any religion that sort of dooms you to a terrible afterlife if you don't live a moral life, right? Is the idea that if you are only doing good because you are afraid of the penalties for doing bad, you're not morally good. You're morally bad, but on a leash, right? So this is the view that Critias takes, is that people are basically bad, and it's only through fear of punishment that they behave well. He also sort of philosophically advocates violence and authoritarianism within society in order to keep people in line. So he says, there was a time when human life was without order, on the level of beasts and subject to force, when there was no reward for the good or punishment for the bad. And then I think humans established laws as punishers so that justice would be the mighty ruler of all equally and would have violence as its slave, and anyone who did wrong would be punished. Now, that's actually not that far off of social contract theory that we get with people like John Locke or Jean-Jacques Rousseau, people like this. The idea that there was a state of nature, and this is particularly the Hobbes view of the state of nature, Thomas Hobbes, that life in the state of nature was nasty, brutish, and short, is his famous quotation. So it's not actually that far off of this idea that originally people lived in this sort of brutal, violent, chaotic society, and then we established laws. What distinguishes Critias's perspective of this from the perspective of people like Locke and Rousseau, Hobbes is a little more in the Critias type vein, but for people like Locke and Rousseau, the purpose of laws was to liberate us from those experiences of violence, to create order that protects us, that organizes our lives, that is beneficial to us. For Critias, and I think more for Hobbes, the purpose of the social contract, even though Critias doesn't use that term, the purpose of the social contract is to establish control over people. This is about power. It's about order in the sense of the Roman view of order, I guess. Basically, seeing order as the imposition of order. You must obey. Order is derived from being told what to do and doing it. That sort of notion. So Critias is very much in this particular vein of social contract theory. The idea that the social contract is established not to benefit people necessarily, but to control people. Not hard to see why he became one of the 30 tyrants.